All right, question number 5 from Elaine. How does one identify first principles in context of causes of behavior? And how does one calculate the equilibrium of supply and demand between these first principles? Does biology, metaphysics, politics, class, sex, and generation each have their own set of first principles? For context, in determining the cause of behavior, Curt once said it is not biological versus narrative, but rather supply and demand split between biological versus metaphysical, strategy narratives versus political institutions versus social classes versus sex versus generation. Curt also added, so reduction to first principles, where all first principles are in equilibrium, because that's the only way the universe can know anything, survival.
I didn't prepare an answer because I'm also unclear of how exactly do we identify first principles, because in my mind, really the first principle is just the quantum field and its behavior.
Yeah. Okay. So what is however, yeah. Fuck. All right. It's real. I do this thing called the grammars, right? And the grammars basically start with mathematics, and they work their way up through the chemistry, to physics, then to chemistry, then to biology, right? And then to ecology, then to cognitive science, then to economics, and then all the different things in between there. And then we get into we finally get into speech and all the way up. So and then we get into the fictionalisms and the deceits and the retaliations and all this other stuff. So there's a huge. So what is the difference between each of these grammars? It's the number of dimensions that we have to account for in it. It's the same thing between, let's just take an obvious, which is the quantum background, what we call the quantum mechanics, right, which is what happens at the protoparticle level, then what happens at the particle level, then what happens at the element level, what happens at the what we call chemistry level or molecular level. Molecular level is probably better, and the biomolecular level, and then the organic level, and we work our way up. So what's happening is that there are at any given scale, like that's the quantum background, there are a number of operations that are possible at that scale. At the next scale, there are emergent operations available at that scale. At the next scale, there are emergent operations available at that scale. At the next scale, there are emergent operations at that scale, until we work our way up to reasoning, which means there's a whole lot of dimensions possible and a whole lot of operations visible at that scale. So when I say that, how do you identify first principles? What you're looking for is the emergence of you're looking at the emergence of new behaviors, new operations possible as the scales increase in complexity. And so we call these disciplines, right? We call it subatomic physics, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, biology, um, uh, all the way up to economics and whatever else we do, evolutionary strategies. So when I say a first principle, I'm saying what's the first principle that emerge? What are the first principles that emerge at this level of complexity? Because obviously what's possible in the quantum background turns out to be stupidly simple. It's either you can add more energy, or because you've made, I'm not going to get into all that, but you can add more energy and produce a stable relation, or you can't. And it turns out that it's basically digital, we call it, right? Which is why they call it quantum, is that this range doesn't do anything, but at this level, you can't see that. At this range, no additional stable relation will form. But at this level, you have a quantum and a new stable relation can be formed. Well, that principle is consistent through all existence. as a new stable relation is formed, a new degree of complexity, you have newly available operations. The operations available to the elements is greater than the options available to the quantum fluctuations. That's why we have so many elements and so few basic protoparticles and particles. So the same is true all the way up. So when I say a first principle, a first principle means something that is not reducible. Well, it's not true, as I think Martin just said. Everything's reducible down to fluctuations of the quantum background. That's true. But then if you say, well, if we say there's still, it's possible to identify emergent properties of the first principles of every scale. And that's what a discipline is. It's the first principle of every scale. The same thing for the grammars. It's the first principles made available at that scale with those dimensions available in it. So when I say this, I say that these Martin's right is that everything's just what is possible by the quantum background. And if you understand Wolfram, he's saying, well, the quantum background is an evolutionary process, just like all other processes. And the reason the quantum background is what it is because the only one that could survive. And so we move this principle upward, and we just come up with what we call disciplines, or I would call grammars, right? I would say that a discipline is just a grammar consisting of the nouns, verbs, right? The entities, the verbs, the operations, the agreements, or which would be the stable relations or unstable relations, the grammar, which is the rules of continuous disambiguation in the speech that express it. So it'd be like saying there's arithmetic, basic mathematics, multiply, divide, whatever, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, pre-calculus, calculus, and analysis. If I move up that spectrum, each one of those things is allowing more dimensions. Just like if I have an observer, and then that's a 0, right? And if I have a point, that's a 0 point. If I have a line, that's 1 dimension. If I have a plane, that's 2 dimensions. If I have a cube, that's 3 dimensions. You're adding more dimensions in each of these, no matter what we talk about: mathematics, language, the grammars, and the disciplines. So when you say what's a first principle, it's just what's irreducible at the level of new emergent operations, new opportunities for recombination. So I'm watching your faces, and I can't tell if I made enough sense.
The first principles would be like, for example, elements in chemistry and operations possible between them.
Yes.
I didn't understand
Same
that
thing.
last part.
Verbs and nouns.
Yeah, exactly. It's just verbs and nouns.
Okay.
That's all it is. Right? It's just the emergence of new verbs and nouns that allow you to determine what operations are possible at that scale. What you think about it is humans can't think about everything in terms of what's the quantum mechanical, this bit of DNA, this single nucleotide polymorphism here has some interaction with we can't think of it as quantum mechanics, because if we try to think of the human body as that, it's too much for us. So there is this cognitive sort of limit that humans are capable of. And so we've worked out a way to break the world into sets of first principles that allow us to perform analysis and computation of what operations are available. And as you're correct, it's just nouns and verbs. What new nouns and verbs are available at each level of complexity?
And the precision also decreases. Like elements are completely discrete. That's biological species is much more nebulous.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Is that how do we categorize the thing that's so complexity? So we always reduce things to some way that we can hold it in our heads, because we're limited by our conceptuals. And it'd be really interesting if humans could actually, if I could look at you, Martin, I gotta be able to make some fucking joke out of this. I gotta be able to, I probably can't. Right. But if I could if I could think of all the quantum fluctuations that go into making you, I mean, that's fucking insane, right? I mean, the universe probably can't compute. I'm almost certain the universe couldn't compute that, right? Other than being you, right? So we have to break it down into it. And the way we do it is so that we can express it as grammar, a language. And so when you look at what we call a discipline, it's nouns and verbs, operations and agreements or disagreements, and that's all there is. And then we do it at some level of scale so that we have a way of describing operations at that scale. And then when we go down to the below the elements to the particles, right? Then we'll talk about the particles at that scale, because it's we every time we go up, we generalize, and every time we go down, we analyze, we disambiguate.
So
Did that make sense? Because if I got Martin, I'm surprised that didn't. Did that make sense, Martin? Does that make sense now?
Yeah.
Because when you originally said you're not sure what yourself, did we get there now?
I think so.
Okay.
I'll paraphrase just to make sure I understood. So let's take geometry, for example. When you have one-dimensional, we have a line, and the only thing that are possible is you can either go left or right, or you can have a length. When you expand that into the second dimension, now you can actually have a direction and area, and probably missing a couple. So that bare minimum set of nouns and verbs that you can apply by increasing the dimension constitute as a first principle when you move to that level of, what do you call it, complexity. And now when you go to 3D, now you can have volume, you can have even more things, and so on. So it's essentially the first principles constitute the bare minimum, most parsimonious set of nouns and verbs and operation that you can apply when you increase in complexity by adding dimensions to certain things.
Exactly. Thank you. I wish I could say it that well. Now, if you want to know why, when I launched the Institute, I built everything up from that statement, geometry, and I failed because people couldn't understand it. Now I kind of wonder that now you understand it. What?
Well,
I think. Go ahead.
If I think of it in geometric terms, right, then I understand. I think it's another thing to apply it to human interactions and dimensions. Probably just, I mean, it's probably like like I said, like a postgraduate exercise. You just got to document that.
Yes. So when I say the first causes of behavior, which I think is what this guy is getting to. By the way, I have had one of my top people, and he was a friend, but I'm not sure he considers me a friend any longer. It's Alan. The name is Alan. If I understand the correct pronunciation is Alan.
Is it Elaine? No, that's female. Align. Language.
Well,
Alan?
No, it's Alan, right? I mean, I don't. That's unless it's this guy pronounced. I don't know. I mean, the guy I know, he's a mixed South American, and he's one of those Europeans that's raised in South America. You know, it's from a rather fancy family. Anyway, so we want to get this. How do you supply? So, for example, when I want to talk about behavior, all I have to really do is reduce it to the first principles of cognition, and I build that up till I get to where does a new emergent differentiation come in human behavior? Well, there's emergent differentiation in our ability to conceive, right? I mean, conceptualize, simply because neural connectivity varies between us, the quality of neural connectivity varies between us. But when you get to real differences in behavior, it starts with sex differences. That's the primary difference. Why? Because the hemispheres, right, divide somewhat. The hemispheres have to divide the labor, and you'll notice that one hemisphere is slightly ahead of the other. Is they have to divide the labor because you're actually trying to coordinate two sides of the body at the same time. So in order to prevent conflict, they divide the labor. And so once you get there, now you said, okay, well, how does that? Well, it happens because in males, we're dominant on the side, and females, they have more interconnectivity and use both. So what you do is more now versus less then, right? So we go over time versus in time. So the nature figured out how to solve this problem based on the division of labor and time. And it did that because sperms swim fast and have low mass, and eggs move slowly and they have all the mass. So it turns out that evolves into sex differences in cognition in the brain, at least in humans. And you end up with all origin of all human behavior, which was really hard work, by the way. It just turns out to be sex differences. And sex differences are explicable, as we've said, division of time and responsibility. That's it. And the women don't want responsibility because they're fearful. And men want responsibility because it gives us status, specifically because women are fearful. And if you start with that and you go up, then you go up to how many brain chemicals are there? Well, there's basically 4 that cause our behavior. And the fourth one is, of course, the oxytocin, which is the bonding agent. But so you really get 3 dimensions plus bonding, so you get a 4th dimension. So with those 2 things, you've basically ended up with describing all behavior. So all we do is document all the how those first principles manifest in all sorts of human behaviors. So I mean, what I just tried to illustrate there is, just as we go from the quantum background to protoparticles to particles to elements to molecules, I just went from, here's how we go from neurons, which all they do is vibrate. That's all they do, right? Neurons all the way up to the division of labor, right? Division of labor, because we're bi-hemispherical, right? It's that are bilateral, so we have 2 hemispheres and they have to coordinate. So that turns out to create the opportunity. It's important. The hemispheric bilateralism creates the opportunity for division of labor between the hemispheres, and get most of your talking over here, and most of you, and really it just ends up being predator and prey, right? That's the division. Time and predator and prey is the difference. A male predator, female prey. Females have evasive responsibility and hyper consume, and the males have hyper capitalize and seek responsibility for status. And everything falls out of just that simplicity. So first principles are whatever determines whatever emergent scale, whatever scale of complexity the behavior begins to emerge at. In other words, where do the new nouns and verbs appear? Does that make sense?
Yes. And just because this thought, just in case people question, well, how can you have such varieties of different behaviors and conclude that it's all deducible down to the, just these 4 chemicals and so on? I think Wolfram actually proved that you can have seemingly chaotic system emerging from rather simple behavior, right? He illustrated it using the like you have these balls just moving in single direction, and then as soon as it interacts with the environment, start bouncing around, all of a sudden you get after n iterations you get chaotic behavior. And the thing is, you can't really the thing is you cannot back compute and figure out what the original state is if you just take a snapshot of the chaos behavior.
Right. So how did you said that something very elegant in there. It's the chaos, irreducibility. You have to, so it's the kind of thing of you just build up from the layers after layers and layers, which is why I did the foundation series of cognitive science, right? I want people to understand how the brain works. It's really stupid simple, it turns out, right? Because nature doesn't have a lot of the brain problem for nature is it can't remember and it can't figure, right? It just tries and errors and keeps what works. We're the intelligence is the benefit, right? Because we can actually not expend so much energy. In other words, we can modify, adapt in real time, whereas everything else had to die before it could adapt. It's fascinating, really. So
do neurons actually store state?
Do what?
The neurons actually store state.
Connections.
Yeah, they store relations. So the way you think about it is, your brain, all these senses come in, right? You basically, it's half of your brain is divided toward vision, and the rest of it's everything else. of your nerves, excuse me,
Mhm.
for division and then everything else. All that stuff comes in, and it's just this. It's all it does, right? Every one of them. That's all they do with pulse. And they have to turn that into meaning. In other words, they have to disambiguate it. And so it goes through this. If you look at the visual cortex in the back, it just goes out in layers like a target
Mhm.
of how do I organize this stuff. And then once it gets out to a certain size, it divides it into objects and backgrounds, or objects and spaces and backgrounds. And then once it gets to objects, it would go finer and finer. So it just starts dividing, it starts putting stuff together into stuff that can be broken into objects and spaces and backgrounds. Anyway, if you start going through this, there's all sorts of other things that are happening in your hippocampus. Like, what's your head direction? What's your eye direction? What, in other words, there's the front of your chest is where your brain thinks your body is, right? And so it calculates your eye direction, your head direction, that how fast you're going through space, what your turn radius is, and it does this in a very binary, bitwise type of fashion. And then it takes that information and it indexes it with whatever space like you're in right now, your body space, which is, think of it as your brain makes a hexagon around your body, right? So because then we only have to have really simple things to figure out whether to turn right or left to go straight. And so you get this hexagon around you, and then you combine that with the references of objects and spaces and places, and then your mind stores that as an episode, and a chain of episodes become locations. So your brain creates locations, your body movement, speed, velocity, turn radius, and whatever, and it puts it into a context of a space within a place within a location. And
What
it just keeps an and it stores that as, basically, think of it as a dot pattern. That's really how it
what I
stores.
meant, what I actually originally what I
Okay,
asked was a
sorry.
lot more simple. So the neuron cells themselves, they have
Your mic is breaking up on Francis.
what I'm saying is, do the neurons themselves have like transistors and memory in that it's on off, or does it or does it store memory by forming connections? I think that's what
Yeah,
Martin
that's
was
a
saying.
great question. It's not the neuron, it's the dendrites. So a neuron is just like, okay, everybody voted, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it does. In other words, the real purpose of a neuron is to feed the dendrites
Mm-hmm.
and axons, right?
So it's like a cell
all
for the
those little,
dendrites, for the connection themselves.
right? But the computation is done by the dendrites. And so if you have like a cell body and you have a bunch of arms coming out of top of it, then there's an axon coming out of the bottom, right? That's where the message gets sent,
Mm-hmm.
is out the axon. And there's this little gateway at the bottom, and it's just trying to accumulate enough charge to fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Meanwhile, the charge is declining, right? So it's build it up. And so what's happening is just like any other cable connection, if there's these dendrites going out and these little spurs on it that actually become the connections that grow, right? And so when one of those things starts sensing sensing stimulation, it grows a little bit, and it happens faster than you think.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It goes a little bit, and so there's stimulation in the like a radar, and there's chemical stimulation in the liquid environment. There's when the things get close together, then they find a stimulation that's nearby, then they connect, and then they have more stimulation, and then they form a bouton, and where there's more connections, right, between the receiver and the transmitter. Am I doing that right? The transmitter and the receiver. Yeah, it's like sex. It's transmitter receiver. And so then you get more bulk there, which means more chemistry can happen more faster. And then if the dendrite says there's not the stimulation keeps happening, the next spur grows up and it creates another one. And this stuff just keeps happening until the connection is reinforced. So when you sleep at night, or when you're resting, it's like a carburetor. Your brain's doing like a carburetor thing. And one of the things it's doing is just it's going through all your hippocampus of all the memories of today, all the episodes of today, and it's just bing, 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 keeping those neurons charged so those dendrites can form connections. So the computation is in the dendrites, which is zillions of.
It's actually interesting that the computation and the memory forming happen simultaneously versus like computer hardware, right? You have the computation happening independent of the memory.
Correct. Which is why they're having it's so costly for us to do AI today, because we don't have neuromorphic computers. What you really need is a
hardware
thing
that
right
can
down
form
here.
connection on its own organically, dynamically, rather than the silicon lithography, and essentially just form like
You
you
just have
can't
to
change
bring
it.
shit in here to have it figured out to go back again. It's really costly, whereas the neurons don't do that. It's like all computed locally, and each one it's just a huge, vast parallel division of labor. And so we've still got a monolithic system. That's why there's so much compute time involved in current LLMs, is it's incredibly expensive because they have to do things one at a fucking time, or X at a time, really. Whereas neurons don't. They do very little computation. The thing is how scary accurate they are.
This
Because
may be
what they really
totally
do
off
is
topic, but I think
all right.
one way that we might be able to solve this problem is to have, for lack of better words, a bunch of IoT devices, and then they form connection via software protocol rather than hardware. Just assume that hardware is all connected, but you form connection between nodes by doing, mesh level connection or authentication.
I mean, fundamentally, I mean, that's what they're trying to build in a neuromorphic chip, right? I mean, it's just instead of a really powerful processor that has a lot of address space, you have a really weak processor that has a narrow address space. It's only like this. I mean, when you look at a neural column, right? I mean, it's basically 6 layers. I mean, I don't have anything thin enough to show you how thin the outer layer of your brain is, which is where all the neurons do all the work, right? Everything else is just white matter connecting it. So that little six layers to it. And even the 6 layers are just because the original brain that we had has 3 layers. And so what happened to give us the neocortex is that doubled over, the part that controls our movement, doubled over and gave us 6 layers. So if you look at those 6 layers, they actually do different things. Like the top one says go this way, and the bottom one comes in from the thalamus. It tells so that it's not. I mean, I explain all this stuff in the videos, and it's not. So when you get in there, you're saying, well, this neural column, it's far enough away from other columns. I mean, these are very small, right? But there's only 70 or 80 neurons in them, right? And that neural column does a job. Microcolumn would be the better way to look at it, because this is a confusion in the literature. But in this microcolumn, and then they have a broadcast radius. And the reason they're separated is so that they can broadcast, but they can broadcast to within themselves, but they can't necessarily broadcast across all the time to others. So you get them basically these millions and millions of these little computers, and each one is really good. Like the example we use is from what's his name, is that I might just feel this, right, but I felt it by moving, and I got before, during, and after pulses, and those neurons know that I'm holding that they're voting on what could this be. Because it's really familiar to me, it's going to say that's not only a coffee cup handle, but it's my coffee cup handle, and that's the coffee cup handle I hold all the time. So all these neurons are in parallel, are looking for little stupid patterns like, what's this between those fingers? And they just cast a vote for my little fragment. And all the fragment votes come together at the next layer up and say, oh, that's a handle. Then the next layer up says that's a cup. And so you have this little fucking bit of neurons over here in your head that connects to everything else and says, hey, that's a cup. Moreover, it's your favorite Starbucks coffee cup.
So
Right?
what it's doing is the chemical traveling down the axons, it essentially form a decision tree.
Correct. That's all it is. That's what I say. It's so stupidly simple. And that's why philosophers always sound stupid to me. Because I mean, today's philosophers, when they talk, I think that they sound like children. Because what's going on up there is, if you to an engineer anyway,
Mhm.
is stupidly simple. There's just a shitload of it. There's
Right.
a lot of it.
This is the level that the philosophers look at it as the end result of all that combinations and the chaos, and they try to make sense about it. But if you go to first principles and look at how the mechanism actually works, then you
Fucking
can
simple.
figure out that how from that simplicity, how does complexity actually emerge.
Yeah, and we the problem, I think, is that I have one guy I really follow very deeply, but if you follow, he's the guy that's always trying to bridge uh, the brain and computer science, and I love his team's work. They're super nerds like us, right? You can listen to them, and they're like, so. I got most of them because I think they figured most of it out. What they haven't figured out is that they're still, it's the operational process of the brain, which is what I talk about, is how the brain operationally produces the things at the level of resolution. We need to understand them, right? So in other words, what are the first principles that are at the operational level of our brain so we can understand it? Because it's useful to understand how neurons and dendrites and neural columns and layers and macro columns and how nerves grow from the neural tube out. The nerve cells, stem cells migrate from the neural cell out into the right place, and then they sprout like fucking seeds. And each one of them is looking for a different chemical signature, so it looks for a different place in the brain to go to and connect and wire it all together. I mean, that's really cool. It tells you why things go wrong. But when you want to get down to how does the brain work, it works like a fucking 3D video game. It's really that simple. If you program a 3D video game and you realize, oh, the reason the 3D video game works is because it's the only way to do it. It's really that simple. It's the dumbest, easiest way to do it. And that's what our brains do, exactly the same freaking thing. It's hysterical, really.
So Levi asked a
and-
question, what's his name? The person you follow.
It's Jeff Hawkins, right?
Yeah, it's Jeff Hawkins. Jeff Hawkins.
I've listened to his book. I don't remember most of the biology, but I get the big idea.
Yeah.
Jeff Hawkins like this?
Right.
It's first book on our reading list, actually.
On intelligence.
Yeah.
Now he's moved on beyond that, but it still gets you started. And I'm very disappointed in his most recent book, so I wouldn't recommend it. But his organization is called. Oh, Martin, do you remember what his organization is called? It's not coming to me. His organization is basically a research institute, and they produce AI level material. But they don't produce it like LLMs. LLMs are a very interesting shortcut. I don't know, it's a brute force way of producing output. He's still working at the brain level. How do we make this work it up? And then you have to look at other people to look at the progress of neuromorphic computing.
His latest book, are you talking about 1,000 Brains?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can read it, but I found it. He's trying to get the idea of 1,000 brains across, which is that it's really all these little micro columns are doing all the work in parallel. And so he's saying we have. Go ahead.
The name is Numenta.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Numenta. So I'm on their list, so I see everything they say, right? And I keep track of them. But fundamentally, I need to finish that series because I started getting ill when I was working on that series. And so I'd like to finish that series when I can. And that's probably what everybody needs to know. The next step, I have it all drafted out for the hippocampal region, which is where it starts to get interesting. And then after that, it's the consciousness episode. And once I get there, I think you've got once you've got consciousness, I mean, I've debated on whether to do the six or eight circuits of the brain. The circuits might be interesting to sort of tell you how to work. I'm sure, I think of that more as defending against people who might argue with me. But once you get to consciousness again is really fucking simple. It's just obvious. Even I think I do a good job of explaining why qualia is simple. So those videos are quite helpful. And the problem is when people read us, right, on Twitter or something, they don't know the depth that our work is based on. I mean, they just don't know. They don't know that we're built up from quantum mechanics all the way up to, you know, the structure of the brain and how the brain works in this full way. And we've explained it all operationally. They don't know that. They just like that we talk about it's because they think like chicks. You know, I mean,
You've actually built it from the base principle of the universe and
you're right.
produce proof at every level.
It's just, and that's what our when we say the pamphlet or science is, it's just a list of those rules at every level. And it's the way we do the triangles. The triangles are a great example because there's, you know, the triangles show us that the same principle applies at every level. It's like plus, minus, and charge, right? Well, when we get to male, female, and neutral, it's feminine, masculine, and neutral. We look at the political structure. It's the feminine means of coercion, the masculine means of coercion, and the neutral means of exchange. Right? The triangles are so powerful because they show how the simplicity of the universe is consistent from the quantum background all the way up to our group evolutionary strategies.